All right, welcome everyone. I call the June 16, 2021 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are the continuation of a hearing on the general downtown corridor 3-floor overlay and related code amendments, and a study session on the Downtown Growth Center candidate application. Before we move on to agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff will be participating via Zoom. During this Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This time is for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. We will also welcome public testimony during the public hearing on the downtown code amendments after the staff presentation and before the commissioners begin discussion of that item. Please use the raise hand function if you'd like to make a comment, and we will bring you into the meeting and invite you to unmute. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The imagined Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided the public information for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today, and we did receive a number of comments this afternoon. Video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so everyone can follow along. Those who provided advance notice are able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, we'll take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Dodd.
Present.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Present.
Commissioner Curd.
Here.
Commissioner Robeson.
Here.
Commissioner Alderks.
Here.
And Commissioner Gustafson is absent and excused. She notified us she would not be able to attend this meeting. In addition, senior planners Dave Boyd and Nathan Lamb are in attendance, and Mike Stanger from senior planning from Arch is also attending the meeting to provide some support as needed. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking, and try to remember to unmute before you start speaking. If you are also streaming the live video feed, please turn off the sound because there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. Please try to if you wish to speak, please indicate this by holding the yellow speaker cards or otherwise getting our attention. I will call on you as I see you, and this will help avoid the problem of 2 people speaking at once. Please identify yourself when you ask a question, make a motion, or participate in debate. And then please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. First item on this evening's agenda is public comment. In keeping with Governor Jay Inslee's Emergency Proclamation 20-28 regarding public gatherings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. This time is for items not on tonight's agenda. And I'd ask Senior Planner Lamb to let us know if there are any individuals wishing to comment right now.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. We have 9 attendees. So I would just ask that if any attendee would like to participate in public comment right now, please raise your hand so I can acknowledge you and unmute your mic.
And again, this is for items not on tonight's agenda.
And I would further add that depending on your interface, you may have to open the participants window by clicking on the icon at the bottom of the screen in order to raise your hand.
Okay, since you said that, Dave, thank you. We've got one attendee who's raised their hand. who is identified as Walsh J. So I'm going to allow to talk here with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
And I believe that individual is still muted.
My apologies. I wanted to speak to the specific zoning changes for option 2 rather than the general comment period. So if you can
Oh,
add
okay.
my-
So we will invite you back in at that point during the public meeting.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, and that was the only attendee that raised their hand. So I'm going to attempt to move Walsh back to the attendees list. Okay.
All right. Then moving forward, the next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. We have before us the June 2nd meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Alders, so you first.
I motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second, Commissioner Curd?
I second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the June 2nd meeting. Is there any discussion around those minutes? Seeing none, I would ask for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes? And I see unanimous consent. All the commissioners are raising their hands to approve. So the minutes of the June 2nd meeting are approved as submitted. Next item on the agenda is new business. I'll ask city staff, is there any new business for us to consider at this time?
I do not have any new business, and I'll turn it over to Dave because
None from me.
All right, seeing no new business, we will move into the public hearing. This is a continuation of a public hearing that we had at the last meeting regarding the downtown, general downtown corridor 3-floor overlay and related code amendments. So I'll turn it over to Senior Planner Boyd for a presentation. Oops, muted.
Can't do two things at once. I'm trying to share my screen and unmute at the same time here. Okay. Are you seeing the PowerPoint opening slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good evening. Also to all of those on the Zoom meeting in attendance and watching on BCTV. This is a continued public hearing on the General Downtown Core 3-floor overlay code amendments and related code amendments. And it was continued from June 2nd, which I was unable to attend, but I have watched that meeting and I thought it was a good discussion, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to wrap this up this evening. I want to also acknowledge, as Nathan did, that Michael Stanger's participation tonight, and he's been very much involved in developing the affordable housing provisions related to this code amendment. So there we go. So the purpose tonight is public hearing, continued public hearing, and a recommendation on these proposed code amendments. The big issue tonight is, and the packet that you've received, we retained two options for the code amendments. Option one that was discussed at the at the May 5th public hearing, which was to allow 4 floors and 45 feet on properties along Beardsley and 185th that are not adjacent to or across from single-family zoning. And that comes with affordability requirements. And then option 2, which came up after the May 5th hearing, and as a result of numerous comments that we received prior to June 2nd and since June 2nd from owners and residents at La Rave condominiums. And that would allow 4 floors and 45 feet throughout the overlay with different affordability requirements for properties adjacent to or across from single family zones to account for the fact that the additional capacity for those properties is limited by the special setbacks and height limits. So we've done that analysis. We've come up with a proposal that we think is solid to cover both of those situations for you to consider and choose tonight along with your recommendation. Both of these options keep the special setbacks and height limits in place. Essentially, they don't come into play currently because there already is a 3-floor height limit. The setbacks do, but the height limits don't. But they are there. They're in the underlying zoning. They apply to the general downtown corridor district throughout the downtown sub-area. And both options also add the micro apartment definition and the proposed micro apartment parking regulations. I do want to point out, I think there has been some confusion that any development under these new regs would be micro apartment development. That is not the case. That will depend on the developer and the property owner. And currently, micro apartments are allowed in the city. We just don't have a special definition for them or a special parking requirement. So with or without these amendments, any of these properties could be developed as micro apartments, regardless of which of these 2 options or whether these code amendments are adopted at all. The other thing I wanted to point out is just familiarize people and anybody that's new to this of the area that we're looking at. It's the area in the light sort of lilac color with white cross hatching along Beardsley and 185th, and also along Valley View and west of Circle Drive. Another thing I wanted to point out about these is these areas were all zoned for multifamily housing and some degree of commercial office professional uses before the downtown plan. So none of these areas were designated as a result of the downtown plan or as a result of these code amendments. And so because of that multifamily zoning, that's how the 2 condominium projects along Valley View Road were developed. That's why 2 of the 3 lots along Circle Drive have been converted to duplex uses. That could have happened even before the downtown plan was adopted in 2009. And that applies throughout this 3-floor overlay. The other thing on this map, it shows with the red star is the applicants' 2 parcels where they are proposing a micro apartment development. And the green dot is, well, the yellow dot is the current campus bus station. The green dot is the proposed station location with the ST Sound Transit. Sorry, we get caught up in our acronym with the development of the bus rapid transit line the stop will move out onto Beardsley Boulevard. So option one, a little more detail there, was to define the area where developers could go up to 4 stories based on frontages and frontages along 185th and Beardsley that were not adjacent to or across the street from single-family zones. So it avoided having to revise the zoning map. This will just be a condition within the code, and that could change over time as parcels are either subdivided or accumulated, but the definition would still apply. So it directs the opportunity for additional height to parcels where it really can be fully achieved, and eliminates properties that are constrained by the special setbacks and height limits. Also, this option one by itself would eliminate the entirety of area E from consideration. I've actually kind of steered away from identifying these areas within the 3-floor overlay separately, because that's not really the point. But we started off down that road as a way to facilitate the discussion, and I did want to acknowledge that. And area C is shown, doesn't have a blue dot. The blue dots are on all the parcels that could take advantage of the 4-floor heights. It doesn't apply to C because a sliver of it is across Beardsley Boulevard from single-family zoning. But if it were subdivided, a portion of that site could potentially go to 4 floors under option one. Option two would apply to the full GDC overlay. And in fact, it redefines the overlay in the code from a 3-floor overlay to an affordable housing overlay, because affordable housing provisions would apply to any new development throughout this area, at least any new development of 5 units or more, or 2,100 square feet of commercial space. This option really relies on those special setbacks and height limits adjacent to single-family zones for the existing code. And as I wrote in the memo, the 3-floor overlay, plus the fact that we have the underlying code have the special setbacks and height limits, really is kind of a belt and suspenders approach. And as we've analyzed this further, we think that the impact on single-family zones adjacent to this zone would really be mitigated quite substantially and adequately, we think, by those special setbacks and height limits. The affordability requirements, as I said, are for the areas that are impacted by those special setbacks and height limits, is based on the lower amount of added capacity. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but we think that it's about a 20% increase in capacity, basically from 2.5 floors to 3 floors in most cases. And I did want to note that without any amendments at all, the existing zoning would allow redevelopment, potentially, but not necessarily, including micro apartments. And if the commission chose to go with option one, the micro apartment, well, actually, with either, sorry, that's a mistake in the slide. Either option would implement the special parking requirements for micro housing as it's written now. So just to quickly touch base for the record on the special height requirements. They really apply across the figures say residential only zoning, but it's essentially single family zoning that they apply to either adjacent or across the street from. So you apply the setback, either the special setback in cases where you're immediately adjacent, and then you apply the upper level height limit for another additional 65 feet from that point. So it's really provides 94 feet before you could get to 4 stories adjacent to single family, and 85 feet plus the width of the street in the case where you're across the street from single family. I did want to touch just for completeness on the variable setback requirement. That I think that was explained and understood and agreed to last time. But this basically would allow a developer to move the structure away from single family zoning and downhill from single family zoning by reducing the front setback to a minimum of 5 feet and increasing the rear setback by a like degree. So the change that we're proposing with this code is to have that apply not just to single family zones, but to any single family development. And it's not mandatory, but it does gives the developer some flexibility and creates the opportunity to provide a better, larger buffer to single family. And then on June 2nd, Director Cotterman did share this analysis, which was based on the Larev site and its topography. So, and its topography is pretty similar to almost all of this area. The GDC zoning is in almost all cases downhill from the single family, whether it's across the street and downhill or adjacent and downhill. So in this case, that variable setback wouldn't come into place since you couldn't reduce the front setback in a case where it moves the development closer to single family. But the current situation on that site is that with the 3-floor overlay, that applies to the whole building, and so it would apply to the south side, the side of the site that is away from the single family, facing SR 522. For most of that frontage, there are some SR 522 district lots between that parcel and 522, but essentially it faces 522, and it would force, based on a preliminary analysis, it would force a development that would step down towards the south. So the top floor could only be a half floor, and this diagram may appear to be 2 buildings, but really think of it as a single building with a double loaded corridor on the first 2 levels from the upper side, and then a single loaded corridor on the upper level. And that's something that developers generally don't like to do. It's not a very efficient way to build housing. So building out that top floor does give, like I said, about 20% more units. In this case, kind of if you duplicated the type of development that's on the rest of the Larev site, you might go from about a total of about 25 units to a total of 30 ballpark figures. That could vary again, depending on what type of development is done. Removing the 3-floor overlay and allowing this development on this site to go to 4 floors would maintain the 3 floors opposite the single family zoning across Valley View. So the impact on that portion of the neighborhood would be the same as under essentially the same, at least the visual impact. It would add a handful of additional units, but we don't think going from 25 units to 30 is going to be a significant difference in terms of traffic impacts or other impacts on the neighborhood. And it would allow the developer to build out that top floor and have 4 floors facing SR 522, which is what the height limit is in the SR 522 district. So that is essentially it. There was one other question that I didn't really cover in the presentation that was in the packet for the June 2nd meeting, but really didn't get discussed among all the discussion over option 1 or option 2. And that is in the proposed code amendments, we apply a 0.75 parking space per unit to micro-housing developments citywide. And that was based on the analyses we've seen from micro apartment projects, as well as applying the King County right size parking code. So I don't believe the Planning Commission weighed in on that on June 2nd. So I did want to make sure that we did that. And the proposed code amendments include, if Planning Commission should want to limit that reduced parking requirement to micro-housing developments within a half-mile of frequent transit, similar to what we did for other developments in code amendments that we did last year. There's some language in the proposed code amendments that could be inserted in there if Planning Commission chose to do that. In downtown, all of the districts where this would apply are within a half mile of frequent transit. So with that, I will stop sharing and entertain Commission questions and clarifications on the presentation before we go to public comments. And I'm prepared to start sharing again if commissioners or even members of the public want to speak to any of these images. I also have all of the images from the previous presentations available if we want to go there. So.
All right, so at this time, commissioners, you have an opportunity to seek clarification around Dave's presentation. We'll hold discussion until after the public comment. So if there's anything you need a little more information on, please get my attention, raise your hand, and we'll unmute you or you can unmute yourself and ask your questions. I do not see any commissioners seeking to weigh in at this point. So what we have ahead of us is we will open for public comment as part of the hearing. We will listen to 3 minutes per person comment. When we close that hearing, we will discuss the code amendments and the presentation, focusing on the areas that are in question. And then we will move on to the conclusions and recommendations and seeing if we have a consensus there. So with that, Nathan, do we have attendees who would like to exercise their 3 minutes to make a comment? Oh, you're muted, Nathan.
Sorry about that. Attendees are starting to raise their hand. I'm going to go ahead and let Walsh Jay back in since we heard from him earlier. So give me just a second here. and there is Walsh. So whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Walsh, please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak to the issue at hand.
Thank you, James Walsh. Thanks for allowing me to address the commission. I just want you to know that I am not in favor of including Area E in option 2 zoning change. I am in support of the letters that were sent by Linda Carey and also by Ron and Emily Austin, who are neighbors. I also signed on to the community letter that was sent by Chris and Jenna Gustafson, and I support its content. One comment I have on your last meeting is that there was a decision to not advertise this public hearing and to simply continue it. And that resulted in folks in the neighborhood not being informed about the continuation of the public hearing. And this was really important because you changed the options. E had been removed from the option and it was put back into option 2. So in the future, I would hope that you would, rather than out of convenience, not avoid doing the advertising so that residents are informed when their neighborhoods are being impacted by your decisions. With regard to prior meetings and prior recommendations that have been made by the senior planner, at the May 5 Planning Commission meeting, the senior planner made a recommendation to remove Area E from the zoning change based upon the following analysis. First, the retaining wall on State Route 522 would not allow access to Area E. Secondly, Area E is adjacent to single-family residential properties, unlike Beardsley and 185th, which are not adjacent to single-family development. This results in the 4-story height not being allowed for Area E, which eliminates the possibility of including Area E in the zoning change. Thirdly, the senior planner also said, and this is a quote, "Planning staff are recommending that Area E be removed from the plan. The special setbacks remove any realistic possibility of taking advantage of an extra story of development for Area E." At the last meeting on June 2nd, this recommendation from the senior planner was overlooked and not considered. There appeared to be a consensus growing with the commission to include Area E in option 2. I would request that the commission reconsider the senior planner recommendation from the May 5 meeting and evaluate all the facts related to the zoning change and not just the needs of a single group of property owners.
And your time is about up, so please wrap.
Okay. We're very concerned about the parking. We are concerned about traffic. Trying to go from Valley View onto Kaiser now is dangerous. With additional traffic, that will become more congested and more dangerous.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Senior Planner Lamb, next commenter. Oops, you're still muted.
Sorry, that need more practice. Let me pan back over to that list. And I'm gonna choose Sadie, who I believe raised her hand first. So I'm gonna bring them in. We should see them pop up any minute now. Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Ms. Rosenthal, if you unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes to make your comment on this agenda item.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. So first, I appreciate the affordable housing language that is being proposed for both options and hope these types of amendments can be added to other zones, not in exchange for favors to developers such as taller buildings or reduced parking, but because it is important to our community. Developers can already qualify for tax exemptions, which I think is sufficient financial motivation for including affordable housing in the code. Second, I feel terrible for the residents of La Rev. The residents I have met are lovely, and I am saddened that their buildings, which are less than 20 years old, have such extensive water damage. My wonder going forward is how to hold builders to a standard that allows for long-term affordable housing. How do we make sure that corners aren't cut, which causes future financial hardship for residents? Ultimately, I am in support of option 1, because based on what Mr. Flora has done, it appears that a developer can simply request an exemption to any code. For me, there is a huge difference between a developer putting in 20 to 30 new condos versus 200 micro apartments in the Sunrise Valley View neighborhood if La Rev subdivides and sells the western part of their property. The concerns that my neighbors and I have with regards to roads and infrastructure, traffic, pedestrian safety, and parking are wildly different were there to be 20 to 30 additional cars in our neighborhood versus 150. In the June 2nd meeting, Mr. Thomas, representing La Rev, stated that he hopes for development that would be a good fit for the neighborhood. While this is commendable and truly builds a lot of goodwill, once the land is sold, a developer can do what they wish within code. Supporting option 1 and requiring a developer to ask for an exemption, I think would allow for the neighborhood to speak up and ask for something both in character and affordable, such as condos. Further, I believe option 1 is a better fit for the entire GDC because of the differences between the different areas within. I have noticed that within the past couple of months, there has been little to no opposition to the specific development Mr. Flora has proposed. With variable setbacks, proximity to the upcoming BRT, so bus rapid transit, and being directly on Beardsley Boulevard, that project seems to make sense. But that same project doesn't make sense everywhere in the GDC. Hence, I believe that option 1 is a better fit for the general downtown corridor and hope that the Planning Commission will vote for option 1. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenthal. Senior Planner Lamb, next commenter.
Okay. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag when I switch lists. Okay, so I believe Linda was next, so I'm going to bring Linda on in over.
And Nathan, did we lose Amanda, Commissioner Dodd?
Oh, I did not see her.
Yeah, I see her in the attendees. I'm going to bring her back in as well.
Oh, there she is.
And give me just a second. It looks like I need to change Mr. Walsh over back to an attendee.
Hi, guys. Sorry, I was looking for the mute button.
Oh, not a problem. We've been dealing with our own technical side here.
Yeah, I think we're all set. So whenever
Are we set?
Yes. All right. So
Good.
Linda, you've got 3 minutes to speak in the public hearing here.
Thanks for listening to me again. I feel like I'm a part of your family. First off, I want to say I'm truly sympathetic with the folks at La Rev. As I've been in their shoes where our HOA had a 7-figure repair bill and it was not fun. However, it is unacceptable to change the entire dynamic of our neighborhood to accommodate the demands of a single property or a developer. Secondly, I care deeply about the Sunrise Valley View neighborhood, as you've probably seen in my letters. It has been my home for 13 years, and if you've noticed, it's a neighborhood of single-family homes where most of our streets don't even have sidewalks. Introducing a large-scale, 4-story, transient-type housing with hundreds of people and cars will decimate our single-family neighborhood. We, the residents of Sunrise Valley View, will no longer be able to safely walk down the street. We'll suffer people parking on our property or blocking the ability to safely back out of our driveways. We will have to listen to the constant coming and going of cars, delivery trucks, and moving trucks. For sake of what? A developer wishing to make even more money, building out every single scrap of land in Bothell? How is that acceptable? Have you spoken to anyone in the police department about the impact on them by introducing large-scale micro-housing with leases as short as 3 months and a transient resident in residential neighborhoods. This is a single family home neighborhood. I urge you to honor the word and reinstate your previous decision and vote to remove Block E from the rezoning and setback. And besides, LaRev owners are already stated that they're going to build regardless of this decision. So we really don't need to include Block E anyways in the rezoning and setbacks. Thanks so much.
There, I was muted. Thank you, Linda. Senior Planner Lamb, next person.
Yep. I think we've got Christina Gustafson coming in next. Who should pop up any minute now. Yep. When you're ready.
All right, Ms. Gustafson, you've got 3 minutes to speak to this issue.
Thank you. Christina Gustafson, 10811 Circle Drive. I have spent many hours reading through the Planning Commission's proposed code amendment changes, speaking with as many neighbors as possible, and trying to understand and explain what may happen to the last vestige of what this town used to be. I've tried to remain unemotional and repeated over and over that the city really does not care how we feel, and to stick to the facts because it really does all come down to money. If I am right about this, the reasons for Bothell becoming a place that people want to live are disappearing one huge apartment building at a time. There's little green space left, there's little park space, and for many, our town has become a shortcut where they speed and run red lights on their way to other neighborhoods. The hope for a charming downtown when McMenamins bought and restored the Anderson School building excuse me, has been dashed by the construction of several apartment buildings, one of which towers over the restored school building. What was intended as a centerpiece of the town has been dwarfed by buildings granted decreased setbacks, increased height allowances. This is a fact, not a casual observation, not an emotional reaction to a disappearing town, just a fact of the overdevelopment spurred on by the lure of huge profits in the fields of architecture, development, real estate, tax revenue, and the blurred lines that exist within these multifaceted, intertwined ventures. When a town's trees, green space, and pleasant surroundings are lost to unappealing architecture that resembles nothing that fits with the town, that town looks like every other generic town that has lost its history, its neighborhood feel, and the reason that people came to Bothell in the first place. Please hear us as we try to preserve what we have, a neighborhood with wildlife, birds, and trees that cannot be replaced. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Gustafson.
You're welcome.
Senior Planner Lamb, next person.
Okay. I believe we have Emily Austin joining us next. Okay, there's Emily.
All right, Ms. Austin, I see you're muted. If you unmute, you've got 3 minutes to speak to this issue.
Thank you. Yes, and my husband's here also, but he will be speaking for a separate 3 minutes. We're on the same microphone.
Yeah, we checked beforehand on the permission for that. I assure you, we have 2 separate brains, even though we've been married for 30 years.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, proceed with your 3 minutes, please.
Okay, so this is Emily Austin. I'm a resident of Circle Drive, and I continue to oppose the rezoning of Area E. My primary objection is regarding the loss of green space, as the loss over the last 10 years has been significant between the projects on Beardsley and University of Washington campus. Also, regarding the loss of green space, one thing I haven't heard spoken to is just the view from 522 as you're driving into Bothell. Now we see the campus, and then you also see a beautiful hillside of forested, wooded area. And so this doesn't just impact our specific neighborhood, but the entire city of Bothell. Will they see a wall of condos? It's really going to change the nature and character and feeling as you drive into Bothell. not just for those who live here, but anybody who's driving in to visit the city. It feels like a big change that would be irreversible. So, so I remain opposed. Also, if this is about affordable housing, then let's do it for real. And let's not pretend that it's about affordable housing and that it's not about profit for developers. I think there may be option to make the projects on Beardsley 100% affordable. And there are probably grants for that. So let's go all the way, do something bold and progressive. And just for the record, I'm not affiliated with Bothell United Methodist. It was a mention that I was, but I'm not. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And are you turning the microphone over to?
Sure. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Can my time start now?
Yes, I've started the timer. Please proceed.
So my name is Ron Austin, and I'm here to object to the proposed E and parts of D rezone. I have a few questions, and well, I'll start off with a comment. I really appreciate, Mr. Boyd, what you stated at the start of the meeting, but we are here for a reason. There's a request to change E for a reason, and that may create change resulting in more construction to our neighborhood. So here's my questions. What's the story for how E was added to the proposal? My understanding is that it was not requested by a developer, but added by the city. So I may just have missed this information from a previous meeting, and pardon me if that's the case, but can the commission please share this with us, who added it and why, and the timeline for that request? And if not, then is this information that's best acquired by submitting a public records request? This really does seem an important issue for the Law Rev condo owners. And the only reason I'm even talking about that is that their comments seem to have been weighted quite heavily by this commission. Why did they wait till what seems like the 11th hour to make their public comments? The rest of this community has been at this table for months. I would think that the Law Rev condo owners saw the sign posted, since I waved to some of you while I'm walking past with my dog past that sign. Anyways, you know, I want to thank the commission for taking the time to walk this community and to speak with us, because it is a beautiful location. We're not talking about Beardsley here. The impact of an E rezone has been downplayed. It's a pretty sizable chunk of green space here, the loss of which could result in and a lot of property. It could result in years of construction along this highway and along that hillside, and all the maintenance that would go with that. There's families with children directly across from E. That's a small road. They ride their bikes around here. There's going to be traffic nightmares at that lower intersection. On the other side of E, there's also a 135-year-old cemetery. It's still active. There's a service there just Monday. The Bothell family's buried there. It's also a national United States landmark. It's a fragile area. You know, as my wife Emily said, we support affordable housing. It just needs to be planned well. So as Emily mentioned a minute ago, why isn't this even more required? It's not required. It's an option. There's incentives. So I would support making entire zone like A affordable housing, or La Rave, make their area even more affordable housing. Of course, within the zoning regulations that they originally agreed to, like the rest of us. I certainly empathize with the La Rave residents wanting to be more financially secure. But folks, this is a larger issue than any one of our property owners or profit.
Okay, Mr. Austin, 10 seconds, if you please wrap.
For Bothell. I support your statements from May that this should be removed from the proposal. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Austin. Senior Planner Lamb, I believe we have one more individual with a hand raised.
Yep, gonna bring in Ray Thomas here in just a moment.
All right, Mr. Thomas, if you unmute, you've got 3 minutes to speak.
All right, thank you. I want to thank you all again for your efforts. Clearly, the neighborhood around us at La Rev Condos has been incited almost by, it seems, a somewhat paranoid hysteria. And I'm reticent to comment, although I did today prepare basically rebuttals to the 6 comments that Linda Carey itemized in her letter to the commission. But some of the comments seem almost unrebuttable in terms of their emotional context. The area we hope to sell is less than our current space that our condos occupy. Would yield a maximum in terms of 2 and 3 bedroom units, and even if allowed to have, if a developer looked at the 4 bedroom micro type housing, probably 60 to 80 people, and not the hundreds plus that residents have quoted. Even, and especially with the affordable housing and micro housing type options, vehicles would be limited in the area. Also, the residents offer the area as a bastion of single family homes, when in fact the area is dotted with multifamily development. It has long been part of our area has long been a part of the downtown corridor development. And as senior staff member Boyd presented, there are really no code changes here. These are amendments that allow a more reasonable development, including affordability and some parking reductions if micro housing is utilized. None of these things are a given for the La Rev property that has been the sort of focus of these discussions. The green space mentioned has always been zoned for development.
So you've got about 15 seconds if you could wrap, please.
The green space has, while it does have some bird activity, has been a dumping ground, sometimes litter strewn, and occasional vagrant and drug and alcohol use area that would be enhanced by further development.
All right, your 3 minutes are up if you could close quickly. All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. So Senior Planner Lamb, it appears as if we've been through everyone. I don't know if the Austins raised their hands again or.
They did, and Miss Christina Gustafson did as well. So with your permission, I will bring them back in.
Yes, please do. Although I would remind folks, we're not debating here. We're listening to your comments. So
here come the Austins and then Christina Gustafson afterwards.
All right, Miss Austin.
Yeah, actually, I'll be Miss Austin right now.
Okay, Mr. Austin, 3 minutes,
thank
please.
You for allowing me to speak and for your time. We really appreciate what you're doing for this community. I want to just quickly respond to the comment that was just made. For some reason, he didn't state that the condominiums across the street, people from there signed on to this. And I don't know why, but for some reason, he didn't mention that there were multifamily houses along the road that some of them also signed on to here, if not all of them. So no, we aren't. Behind me in my backyard, right behind, right next to my backyard, there's a multifamily house that was just built there. I never complained about that. I didn't complain about the garage that was just filled in. I didn't complain about the building that's now going in right now, or building K over at UW. I haven't complained about any of that. We recognize that there's multifamilies around here. And by the way, a family doesn't mean just one person. There's several houses, there's many houses around here that have lots of people in them, right? Anyways, I feel like that was ignored, that we had dozens of people that just signed a document with our concerns. And a lot of the people who signed that are from condominiums and from multifamily homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. Senior Planner Lamb, I don't see anyone else with a hand up.
No, I believe Christina put her hand. So unless she wants to speak up, if you want to raise your hand again, Christina. Otherwise, I think we can move forward.
All right, then, seeing no other comments. So procedurally, we close the public hearing now. Looking to staff for.
I'm going to defer to Dave.
Yes, that's really up to the Planning Commission. It would be appropriate to close the public hearing now if you choose to, if you would like to keep the option open of allowing further public comment either during or at the end of your deliberation, or during your deliberations, you can leave it open.
And Mr. Ray Thomas has raised his hand again.
Okay, well, let's recognize Mr. Thomas for his 3 minutes, and then we'll leave the hearing open, but move on to discussion and hold any further comment till then.
Okay.
I've received some text messages from board members who are also watching the meeting and residents as well. They asked me to mention that a good section of the property to the west of Larev's property is actually not owned by Larev condominiums. It is listed by the city and the county, or by the county correctly, as an unknown owner parcel, which is really part of the Parks Department's responsibility, I believe, at this point with the city, but is unlikely to be developed since an owner is unlikely to be found, nor is that area likely to be claimed. So that green space at the very end, which I think has gravel parking along it currently, is not affected by the development of our property at all. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our property is up for sale at a fair and reasonable price, either from a developer or as a community park or green space. As with my own neighborhood, efforts to establish the North Creek Forest, the community's efforts to preserve Wayne Golf Course, and community efforts resulting in the purchase of the Shelton View Forest, our neighbors are welcome to develop an offer for our property. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thomas. With that, I think we're going to move on to commissioner discussion. If there's any general discussion, we can do that. Otherwise, we can launch into review of the code. And at that point, I'd ask Dave to share the code with us so we could go through and specifically look at the highlighted issues. After that, we would move to the commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations, which we would go through in some level of detail. So I'd ask first, commissioners, any general discussion around what we've heard before we launch into the code? Commissioner Dodd.
Thank you, Chair. This is Amanda Dodd. I feel a strong need to just take a moment and remember what Dave Boyd told us, what the city staff has said during this process. And Dave, please correct me if I'm wrong as I talk this out, but most of this area is already zoned for 3-story multifamily, correct? this is to move it up to 4 stories, right?
This is
Okay.
to allow 4 stories outside of the special setbacks and height limits.
Gotcha. I've lived in Bothell for 28 years. I've said that in multiple commission meetings, just as context for my thoughts on how the city has evolved. So I can appreciate the passionate responses we're seeing, but I'm concerned to see so many of my neighbors use terms like transient housing, talking about multifamily housing. Having friends and family who've lived in micro housing before, it's quite a thing to hear, and it doesn't represent the Bothell that I've grown up in and that I strive to serve with my service on this commission. So I hope we can all take a moment and remember we're deciding whether or not to zone these for 4 stories instead of 3 stories. And that the parking for microhousing, which my decision there is yes on the parking change and not near transit, just yes for microhousing. But I urge all of my other commissioners to take a step back and separate the emotions that came out very strongly and understandably from what we are actually deciding here today. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Robeson with a hand and the red flag.
Thank you, Commissioner Robson here. Regarding of the affordable housing, which was mentioned by several of the residents in this area, and with connection to what the options are in this area and how that relates to development for profit and what kind of options are available. I'm wondering if specifically maybe Mike Stanger from Arch could talk a little bit about how affordable housing can be built in the area, and for zones who are already privately owned, what kind of programs are available that cities can implement through zoning to encourage affordable housing that are not owned by the city, and why those kinds of incentives are put in place, just so that we can understand why this kind of setback might assist in encouraging affordable housing in all kinds of places and not just city places. Could we get clarification on that issue?
I'd be happy to address your question. Mike Stanger from Arch. It's a really big question, and it really deserves a long, prepared presentation. But the type of tools that we're talking about in this context to help create affordable housing in a zoning context we're constrained by law to against a local government or a state cannot simply require a property owner to include affordable housing or make their housing affordable in a new or existing development without providing some sort of value in return to that property owner. And so that's why in this case we're proposing the both a rezoning that allows the developer to build more dwelling units on the property, as well as the value that comes from the having to build less parking. The other is an incentive program, as you know, the tax exemption program. Those do not have to be used together, but that's the way that we're presenting them for this, for this opportunity. Someone suggested earlier that there are grants available to build affordable housing. That's really a whole nother a whole nother area that that, as I said, would really need a lot of time to explain. But yet again, you have to have a willing property owner. Those funds are difficult to come by. They're very competitive in most cases and situations, and the city has done, a fair amount and is striving to do more of that kind of development. That just that opportunity doesn't present itself immediately in this area, but that's not to say that it can't. So I'd be happy to come back and perhaps with some of my coworkers, give a more complete picture of how affordable housing gets built. But I hope that helps a little bit for now.
Thank you, Mike. Other commissioner general comments, questions? All right, seeing none, I would propose we move into the code. And Dave, if you could share that. Also, just as a heads up, I'd suggest we take a break at about 7:30 for planning purposes, unless anyone desires it sooner, but just get started on this and see where we get. So Dave. Oops, did I do that or did you, Dave? I lost the screen. You're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Dave.
I apologize for that. Once I started sharing the screen, I didn't have a way to unmute me. But did the code amendments come up there?
Briefly.
Okay, let me give that another try here. Okay, can you see them now?
Yes.
And still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Can. So proceed.
Would you like me to? Oh wait, that isn't the beginning. Let me move up to the start of the code amendments. Sorry, I hope it didn't make anyone car sick there. So these are organized in the order of the code, which maybe doesn't put the most important stuff first. But if we can, I can just maybe walk through it and fairly quickly, and you can jump in and if you have questions or comments to make on this.
So pause at each point, and I'll scroll back and forth across the ribbon and see if I can catch people. Thanks.
So the first thing, the amendment to our definitions in the municipal code section 1102.050 is just adding a definition for microhousing. Like we said, there's nothing in our code that prevents microhousing from being built right now. The biggest issue was making sure that we had something in there to address parking, and so that a suite of apartments, the developer doesn't try to treat that as a single unit with regard to parking. So that's why we've added that in. Then we made amendments to section 1207.02, which is where 1207, chapter 1207 is where we have the affordable housing regulations, and so the code refers to those, and we've made some adjustments to address the general downtown corridor district, and let me see. And it just refers back to the provisions, the special provisions in the general downtown corridor district. Then next in order is the citywide parking requirements, and that brings us to our first question here. Here we've added, we're proposing adding micro apartments to the table of parking requirements at 0.75 per dwelling unit. And the one question that I don't believe we've gotten a full response from the commission on yet is whether when we look at this citywide, do we want to limit that to micro apartments within a half mile of frequent transit stops?
So I'd ask the commissioners to comment on that. Do we want this parking reduction to apply citywide or just within a half mile of transit, recognizing that within the entire downtown area is within that half mile? So Commissioner Westerbeck, I see you raising your paint chip.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck here. I would think that should be citywide from my perspective, because we desperately need housing. We're in a crisis.
So to clarify that, do you mean not to limit it within a half mile of transit? Just
correct. Yes. Thank you.
0.75.
Exactly. Blanket allow. We do not require the half mile limitation, but allow it citywide.
Which is as it's written right now. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. I concur with Commissioner Westerbeck. When we did some analyses for corner lot duplexes and reductions in parking minimums, we applied them to kind of a network associated with regional trails. That covers most of the city anyway. I think it's more simplistic from a code writing perspective that we apply it citywide, especially if these are going to be developed in mainly the regional activity centers anyway. So it makes a lot of sense to do it this 0.75 across the board.
Okay, other commissioner comments? Seeing none, then I'll ask maybe with a thumbs up if you favor it being as written citywide. See 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so Dave, I think you've got direction there.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so moving forward.
So one thing that we've realized as we got into the code writing is, again, related to the micro apartment parking requirement, is in the downtown code, each district has its own parking table. So these next sections just add that parking requirement for micro apartments to the other downtown multifamily districts. Obviously, it doesn't apply in the Sunrise Valley View single family district. And then we get to the general downtown corridor district requirements. And the first change you see there is actually a footnote to the legend for this district, which defines that variable setback rule, and currently defines it as applying adjacent to residential only zones. And we're proposing to change that to apply to single family development, even if it's within the general downtown corridor district. Again, this doesn't mandate it. It provides some flexibility and the ability to move the footprint of the building further away and down the hill from adjacent single family development.
Okay, so let's pause and I'll scan and see if anyone, Commissioner Robson, occasionally the light blasts you out, but but I don't see you seeking a comment, so I think we're good. And I do not see any other commissioners, so I think we can proceed.
And so the next change is to the parking table. And as we were working on these, and this occasionally happens, we discovered that a note that was supposed to be included from previous amendments didn't get in there. And that is the note for the parking requirement for other than micro apartments, that it's the parking minimum is limited to 2.2 spaces per unit. So it's 1 for single family, 2 for single family and studios, 2 for 2 bedrooms, and 2.2 spaces for 3 bedrooms and above. All of the other districts have that language, but it was left out here. So other than that, the changes are, again, to allow the 3/4 space for micro apartments. And then this is the heart of it. Starting with, this is all in, let me see, the 1264-105B currently starts off with a phrase that all of the special requirements on this page apply to development in the general downtown corridor. Well, that was written with the old 11 by 17 hard copy format of the code. Well, it was also a digital format online. But now that we've transferred it into the regular online code, pages don't really make sense. And we've now introduced special requirements that only apply in certain areas. So we're just proposing to strike that from the heading. And then we have the 2 options. Option 1, which would limit the ability to do 4 floors and 45 feet to parcels along Beardsley and 185th that are not adjacent or across the street from single family zoning. And then it goes on to provide the different affordability requirements that go hand in hand with that increase in capacity. And then option 2, which allows properties throughout the overlay, which we're now calling an affordable housing overlay, to developments of greater than 5 units and or 2,100 square feet to go up to 4 floors and 45 feet as allowed under the special setback and height limit regulations. So it's true that in our initial analysis, we thought there were very limited areas beyond Beardsley that could do that. But I believe I said from the beginning that the vacant portions of La Rave was one area outside of that did have some development capacity, and it wasn't until and we do listen to all of the community, and the earlier recommendation was based on what we had heard to that date. But we listened also to the testimony that we got written and otherwise from the owners of La Reve and others that did support including this. So that's why we did come up with this option 2 for Planning Commission's consideration. I think this would be a good time to pause and have a discussion about these 2 options and perhaps a vote on which way to go.
Yes, I agree. So ask the commissioners who would like to comment or ask questions, clarifications on this. Commissioner Alders.
My question is, Commissioner Alders here. My question is, perhaps you can refresh my memory of when that initial conversation was made when Lot E was introduced as part of this downtown overlay, because that was a question that several of the planning commissioners had also wondered about. But there was a specific date to that meeting. Was that back in April, perhaps? And that would be publicly available to the community to review that conversation as well.
Senior Planner Boyd here. Staff, even though the applicant only applied to or proposed to apply this to parts of the general downtown quarter 3-floor overlay east of the line of 108th. I think that was done somewhat out of convenience. It covered their parcel and it coincided with one of the areas within the general downtown corridor that was kind of a carryover from previous zoning efforts. When we looked at it, we thought it really made sense to look at the entire 3-floor overlay area. And that was partly because they're all within walking distance of the current and proposed transit station, campus transit station. They're all within walking distance of the downtown core. And so we thought that it made sense to look at the entire area, to at least analyze the entire area. And we knew that there would be some pushback on that. And the recommendation to limit it to properties on Beardsley and 185th was a reaction to that, and the option of applying it throughout, and especially after we took a closer look at the impact of the special setbacks and building height limits. That really did seem to be a reasonable option for Planning Commission to consider.
Okay, does that answer your question, Commissioner Alders?
Yeah, how did that sound estimate of when to find that Planning Commission meeting where that was initially discussed? What would you say, April on the date of that?
No, it goes back to the March 3rd study session.
Okay, thank you very much for that date.
Okay, other commissioners, this is kind of the big question before us, so I'd like us to have a robust discussion before we vote on it. Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck here. There's something I come back to over and over that's sort of a favorite saying as someone who's trying to see more housing built in a productive way. No neighborhood can be exempt from change, but no neighborhood should experience sudden radical change. This does not, to me, seem like sudden radical change. This is very subtle change. And we're in a housing crisis, and it's got to go somewhere. This is on transit lines, it's by university, it's near downtown. It feels to me like the folks who live in single family homes here should be really considering themselves fortunate that the city hasn't proposed zoning up the entire area, because they've really carved out that neighborhood, entire neighborhood there, which is pretty thoughtful. And I don't think that the areas that are proposed for up to 4 stories with very deep setbacks, in fact, across from single family homes, are going to affect folks quite as much as they think. And again, we're in a dire crisis. We desperately need housing. And this is the most valuable land in the city, hands down. So people have made the point in the past, before I was planning commissioner, and to council in the past few years, that their kids couldn't stay in Bothell because they couldn't afford rent, they couldn't afford a home like their parents could. It's only getting worse. We all have seen it in the paper. We're all aware of what's going on. Locking up land like this does not help that. It does not help our kids stay where they grew up. And I would echo Commissioner Dodd's comments earlier that renters are not transients, and I'm not, someone who thinks we need to be checking in with the police about who's going to move in. Most people are upstanding citizens, and we have a great police force. Single-family zoning is actually rooted in a very exclusionary history, and it's actually falling in places all over the country, like the state of Oregon and city of Minneapolis. So we're preserving something that actually has not been kind to our BIPOC community and our people who have not had the privileges that many of us had. So I'm not one who thinks that it has to be preserved at all costs. It is going to be right now, and we're really not going to affect those folks. So if their neighborhood changes a little bit and they get some extra housing across the street and it's really no taller than their houses right now, I don't think that that's going to be a big impact. There's a study now out of San Francisco. I think some other places have done this too. And they found that if people want less traffic, they actually need to build less parking. Less parking attracts fewer cars. This has been studied now. So that brings less traffic to the neighborhood. So we should actually be ratcheting down parking requirements if we want less traffic and we want safer streets. There's also a lot of data on that. Safer streets, fewer cars. That's all for now, but I'll be leaning towards option 2, as you can probably tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other commissioners? Commissioner Robson.
Hi there. Thank you. Commissioner Robson here. I just have a few other questions that were mentioned by the public comments. With regards to, we were excluding E earlier because of some access issues from 522, I believe, that there wasn't access off of that. And someone else mentioned, well, developers can just apply for some exemptions when they want to develop. And so those are two, as a newbie here, those were two interesting points made to me. And I'm wondering how the LaRive, how, because it's with LaRive, excuse me, specifically, does that impact the decisions commented on earlier when we were looking at these parcels? Or have the developers, planners changed their analysis of the safety of those, of the lot E there?
So in terms of the access, none of those properties in Area E would get access from 522. I'm not sure that the LaRive even has enough or enough frontage to do it physically, and the other parcels along Circle Drive are within the state's limited access area. So the access is going to come off for any new development and the current development on both Valley View and Circle Drive will come off of those streets. Really the only logical place for development on the west side of LaRive's lot is on that end of the lot, or even we would encourage them to have a shared access where the current western driveway is. And then in terms of exemptions, you're right. Developers cannot apply for exemptions to the code. In the city of Bothell, there is a process for applying for variances to the code, but an applicant has to show hardship that is not of their own making. So, not being able to build 4 stories instead of 3 is would not be considered a hardship, and it would not be something that they could get a variance for. What developers and property owners can do is apply for code amendments, which is what has brought us here today. The owner of the Beardsley micro properties, the proposed Beardsley micro properties, applied for these code amendments, and that's what started this whole process in motion. And we are looking at this, and as we do with any amendment that could increase capacity, we look at those as opportunities for requiring affordable housing. So our comprehensive plan requires us to consider that in those situations, and that's been a priority for the city for the last several years now. Did that cover your questions?
Okay, other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I wanted to comment specifically on Area E and its unique shape. I did a little bit of digging, and not in real life, but I did a little bit of research on the area, and the area that we're designating E is actually part of the historic 1909 incorporation, the old city of Bothell. And the unusual boundaries and configuration of that lot and its subsequent use as a multifamily structure is actually because for the first 4 decades of Bothell's existence, we didn't have single family residences. We didn't have that as a zoning requirement. It was only until November of 1951 when zoning ordinances were applied that excluded many swaths of the city from developing multifamily structures. And we're still feeling the effects of that today, and it's causing rents to skyrocket. It's causing an affordability crisis throughout our city. I think that the least we can do is, add these they're very small, minute changes. An additional story adds a bit of capacity without a lot of change to the character or the feel of the neighborhood, if that even is something that can be controlled. I like what Commissioner Dodd said a while back, is that you don't buy a property expecting that nothing's ever going to change again. You buy the whole neighborhood too. And so I think that I lean more towards option 2 as well, because from a code clarity standpoint, making sure that the entire GDC area is coherent and we're not sort of cherry picking areas that we want to still exclude from the development capacity is really important. We want to avoid spot zoning where possible. And not that option 1 is a spot zone, but it's just another exclusion principle that has kind of plagued the city since 1951. So we want to try and avoid those things.
Thank you, Commissioner Curd, for that perspective and that research you did. Scanning other commissioners. Dave, in the package, there was a figure that showed the setbacks here in Area E. Could you get to that? Recognizing jumping around presents its challenges, and you're muted.
I believe that was in the memo, so let me...
Yeah, I think it was in the memo.
So there was a request at the last meeting to take a closer look at not just E, but all of these areas, and how particularly how option 2 would play out in those areas. So I've divided into sections, the 2 sections along Beardsley and 185th, you can see that there is a significant area where heights would still be limited to three floors and 35 feet all along Ross Road and along the properties that are directly adjacent to single family zoning. The reason that that buffer changes because of the parcelization, so and that those special setbacks and height limits only, as the code is written, only apply when a property is adjacent or across the street from single family zoning. So so that's the case near the applicant's property. And it's also the case in what we had labeled Area D. And it's true that these property lines can change, but if Area D was all consolidated or three of those parcels were consolidated into a single parcel, it would actually increase the area where those special height limits would apply. Right now, they don't apply to this parcel that I'm pointing at because it is not directly adjacent to the single family zoning to the south. And then Area E, again, the Morningstar condos are heavily impacted by that, and also their land is fully built up. So I think there's very little chance that there'd be any redevelopment on that property. We've talked a lot about the west end of La Rev site. The three parcels along Circle Drive, which currently have a single family home and two duplexes, are heavily impacted by the special setbacks and height limits. The southern one is fully within the 3-floor setback, so they're not going to be able to do 4 floors on any of their property. The others could do 3 floors on the street side and potentially have not be in the situation of having to step down and have 4 floors facing 522, similar to La Rev.
And Mr. Thomas made reference to a property unknown to the west. Is that the green parcel?
Yes.
Okay.
So at the west end of Valley View, between the west end of Valley View and Kaysner, is a kind of a triangular sliver of parcel that is actually somewhat mysterious in terms of the ownership. It's in the downtown plan. We zoned it as parks and public open space. I don't know that our Parks Department actually does have jurisdiction over that, but in any case, it's not zoned for development.
Okay, so it's not the subject of this discussion.
No.
Okay, thank you. That helps to see that a little more. All right, let's launch back then to option 1 versus option 2. If there is any more commissioner comment, I see Commissioner Alders raising her hand.
Commissioner Alders here. Thank you, Chair. This would still be on the topic of our previous topic that we were talking about. And it was a question for Dave Boyd. When Mr. Thomas brought up the green space that is able to be developed but hasn't been developed and has been used as dumping grounds, could you locate that on the map for us so that we can visualize that?
I really can't because I'm not exactly sure what area he's talking about. I think he may have been talking about that sliver of land that is a bit of a no man's land, or he may have been also referring to the western end of La Rev's parcel and dumping that may have happened there. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you for clarification.
I guess related, there is a green belt as another commenter mentioned along 522 as you enter town from the east. Most of that green belt is adjacent to the single family zoning along the east part of Circle Drive. So the specter of that being replaced by a wall of condominiums is really not, there's a very small area that actually faces 522 as you head out of town to the east that has some limited potential for development.
All right, other commissioner comments or questions, or do we feel like we've discussed this enough for people to make a recommendation? All right, I think given the significance of this, we'll want to be on the record. I'll ask first for those in favor of option 1, and we'll take a count, and then those in favor of option 2. So, and there is always the option of abstaining as well. Although, so with that, I'll ask commissioners who is in favor of option 1. I do not see any commissioners expressing support for that option. I'll ask then commissioners option 2. Which commissioners are in favor of option 2? I see Commissioner Curd, Commissioner Westerbeck, Commissioner Robson, Commissioner Dodd, and Commissioner Alderks. So we have a majority. I'll weigh in then as well. So Dave, I think you have your direction on that.
Thank you.
Your recommendation from the commission. I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break at this point, as I promised the commissioners around 7:30. So my clock says 7:42. We'll reconvene at 7:52, see if there's any further discussion on code amendments before we move on.
Thank you.
So 10-minute recess. 2.
We're on in 10, so I sent that text a little prematurely. Hopefully, we can scramble within the next 10 seconds.
All right, we are coming back in after a brief break. June 16th Planning Commission meeting. We're in the midst of a hearing on the downtown code amendments, and all of the commissioners are back. So I would restart the meeting right now. I have 7:53 on my clock. So Dave, are there other code issues, or are we at the end of the code review? Oops, you're muted.
That was the end of the code section.
Okay, and you got the direction. We did keep the public hearing open, and I do see one individual seeking to make a comment. And then from a parliamentary standpoint, would we then close the public hearing and then vote on our recommendations? Is that the process?
That's right.
All right, so I guess we now have 2 more. We'll go again with our 3-minute standard for these.
Okay. Bringing the Austins in.
All right. Pulling up my timer.
Hi there. Oh, I'm sorry. So it goes to rejoin, and that's kind of confusing. So
that's okay. Mr. Austin, you may begin. I've got 3 minutes starting.
This is the Mr. of the family. All right. Yeah. So anyways, but unless Ms. Austin wants to speak a bit, sorry. Probably used up a minute and a half. But anyways, hey, I want to thank Commissioner Dodd for calling out the use of the word transient. I didn't make that statement, and I think it was used to describe temporary or transitional. But anyways, thank you for calling that out. I can't remember the terminology the representative from LaRev used to describe those that's opposing the rezone. I think we were described as trying to hold on to a kingdom or something, or trying to live like in a wealthy part of Beverly Hills or something. That was offensive and untrue, and it typecast us. And I assure you, we're a really diverse group of people up on this hill. We have a police officer who lives just 2 blocks down. The owner of the Hop and Hound lives right across the street from me. We actually helped him celebrate his 7 years in this area. Like I said, we have a lot of multifamily communities around here. Condo owners signed that document. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out. One more thing. My wife and I, we moved into this community shortly after LaRev was built, and it didn't dissuade us from living here. They've been great neighbors. So I also think it's unfortunate that having high emotions seems to have been used as a negative. None of us are Data from Star Trek, and we can't apologize if we care about this community. Thank you so much for the work you do, and that's sincere, and we appreciate it for standing up for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. And I hope we all keep our comments in a positive sense to the extent possible. Senior Planner Lamb, next up.
Okay, next up is Sadie, who should be joining us any second now. Okay.
All right, Ms. Rosenthal, 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Sadie. And this will be fast, but this is really just a sort of echoing my neighbor. That this is a quick just comment to thank you all for your thoughtful comments and questions and discussion these past several months. So I wanted just to, I feel like I've learned a lot, especially with regards to like planning process, planning vocabulary. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate you all. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Ms. Rosenthal. And the last one I see up, I see one more.
That would be Mr. Ray Thomas again, and I'm bringing him over now.
All right, Mr. Thomas, closing words.
I want to thank you all for a very deliberative meeting. I really appreciated all of your comments and considerations. And of course, your unanimous decision to include us in the code amendments. I think it's unfortunate that our neighbors felt there was some adverse development in the works here. I don't think that's the case. And I think they'll find that no matter how our property develops in the future, we'll all continue to be good neighbors. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. With that, I believe we will close the public hearing. Again, I'll defer to staff. Is there an action required to that?
Yeah, motion to close the hearing.
Okay, is there a motion to close the hearing? Commissioner Robson.
Aye, I motion to close the hearing.
All right, there's a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Dodd.
I second the motion.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded that we close the public hearing on the General Downtown Corridor 3-floor overlay and related code amendments. Any discussion around that motion? Seeing none, all in favor of closing the hearing? And I see all commissioners indicating by raising hand that the hearing shall be closed. With that, we will move on to the draft Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations. There are some elements of this that are somewhat boilerplate and some other elements that I think we should spend a little time on. Dave, you want to pull these up? Yeah. Oh, thanks. You were ahead of me on that. Oops.
Okay. There you go.
So the findings, unless a commissioner wants to weigh in, I think the history, location, proposed action, the listing of the meetings, and the notice on page 1 are all pretty straightforward. I'll do a quick scan and seeing no indication of desire to hold on those. We'll move to the next page, again, finishing up those findings. So the deliberations, I'd like you all to take a moment to look at those. I don't propose to read them all, but it does talk about the findings we made. Oops, left my timer going for public hearing, public comment. Again, there are a number of findings here. Looking, let's just slowly scan number 6, findings we make based on testimony. Number 7, that the 4th floor is appropriate. Number 8, the setbacks and height limits will be retained to mitigate those impacts on single family zoning, stepping them back. Number 9, application requirements providing flexibility, letting them move the setback. Number 10, looking at providing affordable housing commensurate with the benefit for the. Number 11, referring to the MFTE program. And I'm moving a little quickly. I'll pause and do a quick scan. Not seeing anyone. Number 12 talks about the micro apartments, recognizing them, recognizing the parking provisions specific to this housing type. All right, let's scan down a little more, Dave. Consistency with the plan. Commerce review. These plans will be sent for review. DNS will be issued determination of non-significance under the State Environmental Policy Act. These changes are significant are consistent with other environmental review, which was done around the downtown plan. List of exhibits here, and Dave, you will update that based on the late arriving ones, correct? Yes, you were muted, but I saw yes. That this starts at June 2nd. We did receive them up to 4 o'clock today. All the commissioners did have an opportunity to review those exhibits, and I see some heads nodding. I know my fellow commissioners did review those. Comments, again, last comments here are June 2nd, but we have recorded the meeting. I know Nathan indicated he was going to take notes on who spoke, and we will update these findings to reflect those who spoke. We do appreciate members of the public who took time to share their thoughts during this process, and recognize there were some emotions here, so we thank them. So moving on to the conclusions, I think I will read each of these. Commissioner Kerr, did I see a flashing?
You did. Yeah, this is Karsten. I just wanted to mention that maybe we could amend finding number 7 to, instead of the language at the beginning referencing appropriate in some parts of the current GDC overlay, to be is appropriate throughout the GDC 3-floor overlay.
Could I just strike some parts of?
Yes, that would be good.
Because that is reflective of option 2, correct, Dave?
Correct. I thought that I tried to craft these in a way that they'd work for either, but that would be a good edit.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I would point to the commissioners that this is a really important part. This is what kind of memorializes our process. So while I have been going rather quickly, please do stop me or go back, or if you've got thoughts, please express them now. So again, those reflect our deliberations, and we were on to the public testimony, and I'll do another quick scan across. Commissioner Dodd.
Thank you, Chair. Amanda Dodd here. I really appreciated that Commissioner Westerbeck brought up studies that show that ways to reduce traffic is to apply less parking. I would love to see a little addition on item 12 after the right size parking calculator reference that calls that out in a sense, if everybody else thinks it's appropriate. I think it's important that we heard concerns about traffic, and thankfully it has been studied and we know what helps with traffic.
Okay, let's pause. We can all read there are 2 choices. One is to amend number 12. Another is to add a second or an additional point on deliberations. I'm not steering either way, just indicating those are choices. So the final sentence says parking provisions specifically for this housing type are appropriate based on the application of the King County right size parking calculator. And if I hear you correctly, you're trying to get in the thought that right sizing the parking may move to reduce traffic, increasing safety. Is that?
Yeah, maybe something like, we heard from residents that traffic was a concern. I got that far. We heard from residents that traffic is a concern, and we know from studies that right sizing parking will help with that concern. So, somebody wordsmith that, please, but you know what I mean.
Commissioner Robson.
Could we say something along the lines is just influence, putting in a parentheses in that, in the last sentence, parking provisions specifically for this housing type are appropriate based on research in reducing traffic and the application of the King County right size parking calculator, and just not necessarily mention public concerns, but with a notation that it's regards to research in safe roads or something in that vein.
Providing appropriate parking.
So it would be number 12, the last part.
Sure.
Parking provisions specifically for this housing type are appropriate based on research regarding safe streets and the application of the King County right size parking calculator. Or or flipping it, appropriate based on the application of the King County right size parking calculator, comma, with special attention to research regarding safe streets and parking. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, Dave, since you're crafting this, do you have some thoughts?
I think what Commissioner Robson suggested, adding to the end of that statement, what she proposed would make sense. I can make that. Unfortunately, I've got the
packet and not the Word document.
Yeah, I didn't come prepared for on-the-fly word smithing here. Well, I'm not.
So I hate to do this to you, Commissioner Robson, but you want to try again, and I'll try to write it down as we go. And you're muted.
Or I could try to repeat what I heard, and since I'll be entering it into the document, so.
Okay, let's do that.
I think ultimately the summary of what I'm saying is we don't necessarily need to refer to the public concern as much as we emphasize that it's our concern, and we, along with the King County right size parking calculator, we included research regarding safe streets and just tacking that onto the end. With hopes that that's kind of what Commissioner Dodd was looking for with her comment.
And I think hearkening back to Commissioner Westerbeck's reference, the idea is that overbuilding parking tends to attract vehicles, increasing traffic. Providing the right amount of parking mitigates the impact, the increase in traffic.
That's correct. That's what the research, I was pulling it up to find it. It's been around for a few years. And there have been a few different studies, but the idea being less parking attracts fewer cars, it makes less traffic, and also often results in safer streets. So I know that's a mouthful.
Okay, so Dave, you've got a concept here. Now this is to go to the council next Tuesday?
No. It will go to the council on July 20th.
Oh, July. I was thinking 20, but it's July. Okay, so that gives you ample time to make a modification. Now, could the process be that you make that modification, send it to me, and if with the approval of the other commissioners, I would review it, assuming it captures the thought, and go forward with that? Is that procedurally appropriate?
That's how these are often done.
Okay, so I hear what the interest is. I tried to restate it as best I could, capturing what y'all said. And if you're comfortable with me reviewing Dave's wordsmithing of this, we'll make a modification to that and move forward. So I'm going to scan across and see if there's a comment there. I don't see anybody. I see a thumbs up. So let's go along that path, Dave. And that takes us from number 12 here. 13 is a recounting of comprehensive plan goals and policies, and we're not changing those.
I think we were at the conclusions.
Yes, that's right. We were going to update. So conclusions, the recommended code amendments have been drafted, noticed, reviewed by the public, considered by the Planning Commission in accordance with all applicable laws of the state of Washington and the city of Bothell. Pretty straightforward. The recommended code amendments are necessary to provide for consistent and clear land use regulation and provision of public spaces with downtown development. Public spaces part, is that, where does that come in?
I'm sorry, that's a leftover.
I think we could stop with consistent and clear regulation.
Yeah, just period after regulation.
Okay, good. I know we spent a lot of time on public spaces, but not on this one. And the recommended code amendments are in the best interest of public health, safety, and welfare. So I'll ask commissioners all in favor of these findings, conclusions, and recommendations with the recognition there'll be that minor amendment. So Dave, you want to bring us all back together? I can see everybody at once. All right, so commissioners, all in favor of the, I'll ask, so I need a motion to adopt these recommendations, is that correct?
To approve the recommendations
Yes.
and authorize the chair to review the final edits.
So is there a motion to approve the recommendations and authorize the chair to review the minor modification that we discussed? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. I move to accept the draft Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations as amended tonight, provisionally based on the final review by the chair for additional amendments as necessary and stated in this meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Dodd.
I second the motion.
All right, it has been moved and second. Any further discussion around this motion? Seeing no indications, all in favor of the motion, please indicate. I see all commissioners raising their hand, so the motion is passed unanimously. So Dave, when this is ready, please send me an email. We'll take a look. Track changes would be great. I think I made some notes on this, but I'd appreciate to be able to see that. For the few attendees who have stayed with us through all this, we do appreciate your attention. I would point out that these are recommendations of the Planning Commission. We do not, these changes don't become into effect based on our action. It will go to the council. There'll be another public hearing around that at the city council where people will have an opportunity to express their thoughts on this again, and you're welcome to talk there. So with that, we will move on to the next agenda item. Dave, thanks for your work on this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So with a deep breath, the next item is a study session on the Downtown Countywide Growth Center candidate application briefing. And Senior Planner Lamb will lead us on this one.
Okay, let me just bring that up real quick. What is that? Okay, are we in business?
Yes, we look good.
Okay, so yeah, this worked out nicely because we don't have to go very far. We're staying in downtown. So this is our item to discuss the Countywide Growth Center candidate application that we're currently putting together for King County. We do not need any action from the commission this evening. This is purely informational, but we would really appreciate your feedback during or after the presentation and up until we turn the application in August. So I'll get us started here. So, usually you'd put the glossary at the end of something, but we're going to start with it first, just for our audience and to provide clarification for a lot of the acronyms that were in the report if people had a chance to take a look. So these are acronyms we're going to be using tonight. So AU stands for activity units, and that is basically a metric that the Puget Sound Regional Council uses to measure population and employment density within a given geographical area. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that. CPPs are countywide planning policies. These are policy statements from counties that give smaller localities within the county direction for their land use decisions and comprehensive plans. The GMPC is the Growth Management Planning Council for King County. They are who we're going to submit this application to. And I'll talk a little bit about them later as well. LIFT is the local infrastructure financing tool. It is a state Department of Commerce at the state level program that was initiated in 2006, I believe, and basically has awarded several localities money to be able to leverage capital improvement projects within particular defined areas in their jurisdiction. So we'll look at how that's impacted downtown. MPPs are multi-county planning policies that are created by the Puget Sound Regional Council that give direction for CPPs and jurisdictions in counties like Bothell. PSRC, I've mentioned that a couple times already. RDA refers to the revenue development area, which are the boundaries that were established for this LIFT program by the state. Okay, so hopefully that'll help us as we move through this. Okay, so for a little bit of background and context, why we're doing this and why we currently don't have a countywide growth center and why nobody does is because it's very new. And to trace the origins of centers, well, maybe not of centers to begin with, but going back to Vision 2040 that was adopted in 2009, there's a section in the Regional Growth Strategy chapter for centers, and it talks about and goes into a lot of detail about what regional growth centers are and manufacturing and industrial centers are, which are designated at the regional level by PSRC. And then it sort of tangentially mentions local centers, activity nodes, neighborhood centers, and a few other smaller centers, but it really doesn't give any kind of framework for what those are and how to implement them and how they're useful. And so then they come along in 2018, several years later, with this framework update, and they essentially expand all types of centers that were currently established by breaking them down into different centers and distinguishing them. And that those are currently being implemented through Vision 2050, which was most recently adopted just last year. Okay, so in this framework update, they said, this is an excerpt from their introduction, that they're going to clearly define the types of central places, both large and small, within the region that are the focus of growth planning and investment. They're going to establish criteria and planning expectations that ensure centers are developing and thriving in connected communities with sufficient market potential to accommodate new jobs and residents. And then finally provide for consistent designation of centers at the regional and countywide levels across the region. Okay, so this is what I was talking about when they sort of broke existing centers down into more centers. There's a total of 6. So we start on the left here with regional growth centers. They're now broken up into metro growth centers, urban growth centers. For regional industrial centers, they broke them down into industrial growth centers and industrial employment centers. And then we have our new countywide centers and countywide growth centers, which we're going for, and countywide industrial centers. And so this is the definition that they give for, that PSRC gives for countywide growth centers. They say they serve as important roles as places for concentrating jobs, housing, shopping, and recreational opportunities. These are often smaller downtowns, high capacity transit station areas, or neighborhood centers that are linked by transit, provide a mix of housing and services and serve as focal points for local and county investment. So sounding a lot like downtown Bothell. How are countywide centers being implemented? It's sort of a top-down approach from PSRC, who I should have mentioned earlier for any viewers. They are our regionally designated metropolitan planning organization, and they give us direction as a region, as a 4-county region, on accommodating future growth and transportation and economic development needs. And in that Vision 2050 report, they have a whole list separated into different chapters of multi-county planning policies. And so I've just pulled one MPP from there that talks about countywide centers where their MPPs didn't talk about them before. So it says direct sub-regional funding, especially county level and local funds, to countywide centers, high capacity transit areas with a station area plan and other local centers. And then King County has taken that direction because PSRC has delegated designated countywide growth centers to counties. I should have mentioned previously too that this has nothing to do with our regional growth center in Canyon Park on the Snohomish County side. We're only dealing with King County since downtown is in the King County portion of our city. And they're in the midst of updating their CPPs, which they do periodically. And they've said that in CPP DP 36 in their development patterns chapter that they're going to designate countywide centers in their CPPs where locations meet the criteria for with their framework. So if you had a chance to look at the report, you would have seen that there were 2 attachments, and one was the PSRC framework for what a countywide center is. And that was attachment 1, and attachment 2 was a framework that's more exhaustive that King County put together for what a countywide growth center is. All the counties have their own processes for how they're tackling integrating countywide growth centers. But this is how King County has chosen to do it. So what they're going to do is they're going to take candidate applications for jurisdictions that are proposing some location in their city. And later on this year, they will choose the most likely candidates, and that makes us be able to compete for local funding in 22 and 23. But what we have to also do is commit to planning for it in our 2024 comprehensive plan update. And so if we are selected and we receive the designation for a portion of our downtown sub area to be a countywide growth center, it gets officially designated in the next CPP's update, which is in 25 or 26. So not this current round, but of CPP updates, but the next one. And that's the process that King County is implementing. And so we're in the beginning stages of that. So shifting gears here, I mentioned the local infrastructure financing tool earlier. This is a flyer that the city's finance department has put together. I mentioned back in 2006 or 7, we were selected to participate in this program for up to $1 million a year for up to 25 years. And finance has been tracking all of the capital investments that the city has made in the downtown sub area. and all of the private investment that's gone into downtown since we started participating in this program, and also since implementing the downtown sub-area plan in 2009. And so this is what they say about, what does 25 million do to our community? It spurs downtown revitalization, stimulates residential growth, creates additional local jobs, generates a substantial return on state lift investment. And here is a list up to date of all of the city's capital improvements for really that have transformed downtown from what it used to be. And you'll probably immediately notice from the names here, a lot of those projects that I'm sure you all have seen over time related to parks and utilities and new roads, some environmental remediation and environmental restoration. And so why is that important? Because we sort the nexus for choosing the revenue development area of the downtown sub area is that the city has already put an immense amount of resources and completely transformed downtown, and that there's still capacity for growth. So the map you see here would have been in the report too. Everything within the bold red outline is the revenue development area. So this area was established, and I'm going to see if I can articulate this properly because it's a kind of tax increment financing, although I'm not the expert on it. So we get to levy taxes here, and that helps us pay back some of the bonds that we would have leveraged with the money from the state to be able to do a lot of projects down here. Okay, I also want to mention that as part of this application, we don't have to have final boundaries established. We just have to have potential boundaries. I think the language that I used in the report was proposed boundaries. It's a bit of a misnomer because they're really just potential boundaries. This isn't final. It's really when we do the 2024 update that we would have to make the boundaries final. So this can certainly be changed, but this is what we're going to start with. Okay, so in the report, there was also a few tables that just discuss some capacity for growth in downtown that we still have even after the development that we've seen. And we're circling back around to activity units. In those PSRC and King County frameworks for countywide centers, there's criteria for minimum thresholds of minimum activity unit densities. When you're establishing, when you're proposing boundaries, that it's got to meet an existing threshold for activity units. And so we reached out to PRC, and they helped us determine what our existing activity unit density is. Again, that's population and employment per square acre. And for the entire downtown sub area, which you see in color on the map, it's a existing AU of 16. So when we shrink that down to the RDA, and we hatched out all of the rest of the sub area that you see outside of the RDA, we are bumped up to a 27 activity units per acre, exceeding the minimum threshold that King County set. I believe it was 18. Okay, so then we did some sort of back of the envelope math. It was kind of fortuitous because the buildable lands report is just wrapping up that King County is finishing in. They have established what our capacity is for housing units and jobs within each zone in Bothell. And so it's kind of like apples to apples. What we've done is taken the potential capacity for growth in each of the zones in the RDA and we've added that to what's existing, and we think we can get upwards with our current zoning in place right now, upwards of 54 activity units per acre. That's not a precise number. We need to do more in-depth analysis, and like I said, if the boundary changes, that's going to change. That number will change as well. But it's not precise, but it's accurate in that it puts us in that range of what we think is achievable, which is double what it is now. Okay, so wrapping up here, these are the requirements for the application. We've got to submit a letter of intent, which we want to have the mayor sign next month at their one of their meetings, and it just says that we're committing to planning for it in our 2024 comp plan. They want to see our proposed potential boundaries. And that's where we're really hoping that we can get some feedback from the commission on what you think initially about those boundaries, and if you think anything should be excluded or included. Existing land use conditions, we've done a lot of that work already. Existing services and infrastructure conditions, we're going to be talking a lot about our investments in the RDA. Sub-area planning, we're going to be talking about the spirit of the downtown sub-area plan and the achievements to date, and is there anything else left to do. Planning for social equity, they want us to discuss our tools and strategies. We've talked about that a bit and have some ideas that we'll be including in the application for that, and then future land use conditions. And that's where we're going to be talking about potential capacity to accommodate future growth. Okay, so finally here, our next steps are we're taking this to council July 20th for their approval, and we're hoping for feedback from you all by the end of July. We know you guys are off in August, and then we'll send the application to the King County Growth Management Planning Council in August. So with that, I'd be happy to try to do my best to field any questions that you all have. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and if we need to bring it back up, we can do that.
All right, commissioners, this is a study session. There's no action, but Senior Planner Lamb is welcoming questions and comments. And Commissioner Aldrich, I saw you raise your hand before I talked over you, so please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Not a problem. I'm glad you're making it official. Jenny Aldrich's here. I have two questions. I'll go backwards. The first one on the slide talking about equity tools. Are you able to consult with Kelly Ray, who the city just hired as a consultant, who can give you some guidance on what tools to use for that? And the second question is, if I'm understanding the potential activity unit slide correctly, we currently have 16 activities per acre, and the goal is to increase it up to 27. But if I am reading the proposal, like the plan in our agenda correctly, we should have 18 and shift it up to 30. I guess that also leads to a third question I have, but I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, so regarding your first question, we do plan to use her as a resource, and as it turns out, the city has also just established a internal committee that's responsible for furthering council's priority for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we'll be using whatever resources we have and to try to make that section as complete as possible. And we did want to mention that we'll be trying to use more of an equity lens in our next 2024 update, and we think that's important, and especially since this will be included in that update. With regard to your second question, I think you had most of that right. So the current so to establish a countywide growth center, you have to have a minimum existing activity unit density of 18 AUs. And the entire downtown sub area right now is only at 16. And so we've shrunk it down to the RDA, which is about half the size of the entire sub area. And that's what bumped us up to like 27 activity units per acre. And then we think we have capacity to double that. And so that's where we're at. And did you have a third question that you wanted to?
I don't want to step on other commissioners. We can get to it if you would, if anyone else has other comments or questions.
Commissioner Robson.
Thank you, Claire. Robson here. This piggybacks on what Jenny was saying. Is you were asking if we could give you input on those boundaries regarding, could we look at the map again and maybe you could point out to us what your specific questions are in that area and what the options are and so on?
Sure, let me find that slide. Let me go there. Okay.
And if you could maybe even point out, because you had talked about the whole area was 16 and then you shrunk it and it was, forgive me, I don't have the numbers, 27 and it has a capacity for 54. I was having a little bit hard time envisioning maybe how you changed those boundaries and how to get to 54. So maybe using this map, you could explain it a little bit.
Sure.
More what you need input on.
Sure. So we determined what our potential capacity is because King County has just, and I'm sorry, I didn't explain that very well when I first mentioned it. So King County is about to adopt their urban growth capacity report. And what they've done is for the King County portion of Bothell, they've looked at what our capacity is on vacant parcels and redevelopable parcels that could accommodate new housing or jobs. And what we've done is we've said since this entire sub area doesn't meet the minimum threshold for establishing a countywide growth center, we're going to cut some of this area out, almost like you guys did for Canyon Park. We're going to cut this area out and we're only going to work with the RDA for now because of all of the investment that's gone in there. And further, I think most of the capacity is within these more liberal zones. And also to some extent, we're going to have to think about, your previous recommendation for what happens to capacity within the GDC 3-floor overlay. If it is successful at City Council. So that was a long-winded answer. I'm not even sure if I answered your question, so please reiterate it if I didn't. But we've taken potential for growth and we've compared it to what is existing, and that's sort of our impetus for using, the RDA to start with as our boundaries. And then we can, once we have more discussion and further analysis, we can start talking about adding in adjacent parcels and other zones that may have capacity or may not, or excluding particular areas. We've been talking about maybe cutting out these natural areas here because it really doesn't do us any good in terms of our activity unit count. And it doesn't preclude our other departments or the city from being able to compete for parks or transportation funding. So we need to do some more analysis and get some more information from the county. Something I've been wrestling with is, is this more of a quantity thing versus quality? are we trying to just get as many activity units as we possibly can, or do we really want to be thoughtful about the areas that we're including or excluding? And also, I don't know that the boundaries even have to be contiguous. I didn't see in their framework where it said that you couldn't have two areas that are, connected within walking distance or something like that, or just a short distance. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities, but for now we're just sort of focusing on the RDA. So I'll leave that there, and hopefully that helps a little bit. And perhaps I should stop sharing so we can see if there's any other questions.
Commissioner Curd.
Thanks. This is Karsten. Thanks for the presentation so far, Nathan. It's really helpful to take a look at this. I am so excited about this. I've been following it from King County kind of planning, regional planning, and along through PSRC as well. And it's just so exciting that we, members of Bothell, who always are griping about our structural deficit, have an opportunity to have a new source of revenue for all the things that we want to do. Amazing. We should go for it. So I just wanted to make a couple comments that I'm seeing from the way that you've drawn the lines on the map, and then also ask two quick kind of brief questions to see what your thoughts are. One of the things that I'm looking at on the map, but on this other screen here, is that we really are making a strong judgment on which areas of our downtown are productive and which areas might not be, both from like a tax base and for revenue for the city, as well as potential growth. And so it's quite obvious the lower density, more kind of periphery edges of the downtown are not as economically productive, and they're not resulting in a lot of benefit. They're not pulling the weight of the work that the city is doing to thrive and survive. So I think that was just kind of an interesting concept, is that when you reduce our downtown area past the neighborhood down to this core RDA zone, you can really see what parts of the downtown are doing the work, which is awesome. The second thing is that I'm noticing down along the Wayne curve, which is this where State Route 522 goes down towards Red Brick Road Park and the former golf course known as Wayne, or whatever we're calling it now. So along the western side of State Route 522, there's not a lot of development right now. So I'm wondering if that area is included in the RDA because of its potential capacity, or if it's included because of maybe existing capacity. I mean, it's including like a car dealership and other areas that aren't necessarily what I would feel to be really engines of the downtown in terms of economic productivity. So I'm just wondering maybe why those were included. That's just a thought that I was having. But it could be that the potential for growth there is so great that including it in this RDA might be helpful in the long run. Those are what I was noticing. And now here are the two questions. The first one is, you were leading towards what our priority would be in application. And so we're working from an existing network of structures and of businesses and community here. But some of the things that I've noticed have been left out are like the regional trail that serves our community, and that's really a big powerhouse. It's like a freeway. There are a million trips per year on just the Sammamish River Burke-Gilman connection, and I think that that's a really kind of critical piece of our infrastructure, and really what makes Bothell really special. This confluence of different multimodal transportation systems, including bus rapid transit, which this RDA zone that you've outlined really captures nicely. But I think maybe a balance between adding space that might not be economically productive, like those wetlands and those areas that might be more green and open space, or the slough, versus these corridors that connect people and stuff too. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your thought process. You kind of answered it a little bit earlier, where there may be potential to incorporate kind of disparate and discrete locations together. But what are your thoughts about connecting those trails and those transportation stuff?
Yeah, I'll take first stab at that, and then Dave can back me up, because I think he was here when those boundaries were established, and can probably remember why certain areas were included and weren't. But with regard to your first remarks, and thank you, because that's exactly the feedback that we're looking for too. 522 off the top of my head from seeing some of the raw data and with this urban growth capacity report was that there was a lot of redevelopment capacity there. And so I think that was, I would assume that's why it was included, maybe to begin with. And then with regard to the other point that you made about sort of including trails and other amenities and places of significance that maybe don't have development capacity, but that are a part of downtown's identity, I think is a really good point. And I think we can certainly fold that into our analysis. And we can definitely reach out to the county and ask about the boundaries and, does it need to be, are you looking for a square or a circle, or do we have the liberty to just sort of draw the line on the map where we want and start to, downtown's got an identity for sure, but when we talk about a countywide growth center, what that means, and adding and subtracting different priorities and how that changes the identity, if it does or doesn't. So yeah, that's my feedback, and I'll let Dave weigh in if he's thought of something that I didn't cover.
I'll just weigh in. We have talked with our Public Works and Capital Projects group about whether things like improvements to the regional trail and the 102nd Avenue Bridge would qualify, even if they weren't within the boundaries that we chose. And the thinking is that things like regional trails clearly connect our downtown to other areas, so they would qualify, similar the 102nd Avenue Bridge. So we're having that conversation, and we think we're in good shape, and that may be one of the factors that will enter into adjusting the final boundaries.
Cool, thanks. I have another question, but if someone else has something to say, I would defer to them.
Well, go right ahead, Carson. Commissioner Curd.
Commissioner Westerbeck, did you have something?
Oh, there you go. Commissioner Westerbeck, sorry.
That's okay. I was actually telling Karsten, Commissioner Curd to go, and then anyway. I actually don't have many questions because kind of like Commissioner Curd, I'm excited about this. I went to a couple of PSRC open houses a couple of years ago and was really excited that this was going to be developed. There's a lot more detail now than I recall. And this is the direction and the future for Bothell that I had hoped for. We have incredible bones, urban bones here in Bothell. They gave us wisely 100 years ago or so. And we're going to finally hang some more meat on them. And it's going to be good for a lot of people and of all different statuses, socioeconomic outcomes, and so forth. So it's just a really exciting development. I don't have any critiques right now. The conversation so far about the trail is really good. Some of us were discussing Carmel, Indiana recently about how they found the trail that connected up a couple of cities, Carmel to Indianapolis. They decided to develop it kind of like they did on trails in Amsterdam and in Netherlands, and they found that it's a booming success and it's totally boosted the economy. So I think the trail point is really good that Commissioner Curd brought up. And the only other thing that comes to mind is because the trail and 102nd Bridge was brought up, the areas along Riverside Drive are kind of semi-dense with a mixture of uses. And I don't know if we should consider looking at that. It'd be kind of a funny shape to go over there and grab those, but there's a good mix in there, and it's it's not just single family, and there's industry and commercial stuff in there. So it might be something to consider. Thank you.
Commissioner Robson. Yep.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Commissioner Westerbeck was saying, that Riverside Drive connects with the 102 bridge and then connects with the trails. So I really think that has a lot of growth opportunity if you look at, because the trail is on that side of the river, and connecting the senior center across the bridge to downtown, I think has a lot of potential over there on Riverside. I really feel like we're not using Riverside Drive the way we could be, and this could be a really great access point for that.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that feedback, and I just don't have the tools right in front of me, the capacity report, but we can certainly look at what those zones are and if there's potential there. So thank you.
So a technical question, Nathan. Excluding the university, how are the activity units calculated in the university? It's a pretty big area. Part of it has a whole lot of students sometime. Another part of that area is wetland that's not doing anything. So what's the calculation for that chunk?
I'm going to try to answer this as best I can. So that's something that I'm not as familiar with. I didn't do a lot of the hands-on work, but I did see that was a big discussion when we were working on this urban growth capacity report with King County, is how to measure that capacity. What I do know is that for whatever reason, we didn't have, the report determined that we didn't have capacity there for housing, but there is there for jobs. So we are capturing activity units as employment and jobs, and that's counted as potential AUs. So I don't know if maybe others thought, or if you're alluding to maybe incorporating more of that area. That's something we could consider, but off the top of my head, that's the best answer I got for you right now. And I can circle back around and check with other staff for a more technical answer. So
sure. I was almost wondering on a definitional level whether a student is an activity unit. There are those individuals who come and go, and just as it is right now, how is that measured? Is it measured just basically on the jobs for the professors and the staff who are drawing a paycheck from that unit, or are the other individuals coming calculated? Again, it's kind of a technical question.
I think the latter. I could be wrong, but what I want to do is check and get you an official answer, because that is a good question. But yeah, I think we're just accounting for the professors and adjunct and admin. But like I said, I could be wrong, so I'll circle back around with you.
Thank you. Others? Commissioner Alderks.
Thank you, Chair. Karsten, you're up next. I know we had extra questions. So Jenny Alderks here. So the last conversation was really interesting in terms of, I'm thinking of it in terms of generating sales tax. As we're talking about, so one of the interesting facts that I learned recently from a council meeting was that sales tax revenue went up during the pandemic because people were buying from Amazon and Amazon was giving sales tax to the city. More so than if the same people did their shopping as they normally do, they have to leave Bothell and the sales tax to other cities. So when we're talking about activity units, I'm wondering if there is a way to capture locations and activities that capture revenue in terms of sales tax. And I don't know if that's allowable under this program or not, but I know that for Bothell it's important. And then I still have the other question from earlier, but moving on.
I'm going to pause for a minute. Our meeting is scheduled to end at 9 o'clock. I think we do have a little more discussion around this. So I'll ask if there's a motion to extend the meeting, let's say 10 minutes and see what we can do. Commissioner Dodd.
I move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes to 9:10.
Okay, is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay, all in favor? All right, we'll extend the meeting till 9:10 and see if that suffices. And then that wasn't why you initially raised your hand, Commissioner Dodd, was it?
It was not. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Aldrichs touched on something that I am very interested in and very excited about as a possibility of this, which is looking at economically productive places. So there's a lot of studies in urban planning looking at if you take, and there's nothing wrong with Fred Meyer, that's where I shop a lot, but if you take Fred Meyer and all their parking and how much revenue that brings the city, per square foot compared to like Main Street with lots of individual shops that isn't, 2/3 parking compared to how much that revenue makes. I would love to see us optimize that within this area to really take it. So basically, let's really get our parking to the correct size, not have too much, that is one of my main interests when this came up and when I was reading through it is just, it feels like an opportunity to really evaluate, the part of our city that, we need these economically productive areas to help afford, one, just being a city because we do have our structural deficit, but two, the places that are not economically productive, like our forests and our wetlands and our huge parks that don't have names because they might still be called Wayne or not. So that is something I would love to hear more about as we dive into this.
Thank you, Commissioner Dodd. Other commissioner comments?
Can I respond to those, to Commissioner Aldrichs and Dodd before I get lost in my notes here?
Sure, please do. And then Commissioner Curd after that.
Yep. So yeah, that's a interesting way to think about this, and I hadn't come across that yet. So what I think I'll do is reach out to PSRC and do they have any methodology for capturing that? And I'm right there with you, Commissioner Dodd, in terms of economically productive places. Certainly, you get more bang for your buck, I guess. With smaller places that draw in more activity compared to big box retail or something like that. And so we can delve into that a little bit and, look at our zoning and development regulations and make sure that we're sort of prepared to, regulate that and make sure that we don't have seas of parking or overpark and lose capacity. In terms of the amounts of money that come in and what's levied for taxes, might have to check with finance. But yeah, let me think about that some more and try to circle back around with both of you on that front. So thank you.
And Commissioner Curd. And then Commissioner Westerbeck.
Okay, hey, this is Karsten. My final question from before was about connectivity between pedestrian and bicycling infrastructure downtown. Our RDA area that you've designated here shows a lot of gaps in infrastructure like sidewalks, even curbs. I remember just like a couple months ago, there was a vehicle that left State Route 522 near Wayne Curve and ran up against the bollards that are protecting the wetland over there. That was not great. So I'm wondering how, when we are applying for this designation, do we reference and do we start talking up the gaps in our pedestrian infrastructure and saying how designation as a regional growth or as a county growth center would be supportive of filling in those gaps? Or do we more like remove those areas from consideration or ideally work towards fixing those areas so that we can present a network of infrastructure that works multimodally?
Yeah, I think the former, that is a fine recommendation. We'll definitely include that in the report because that is, after all, the reason why we are, wanting this designation is to be able to compete for local and county funding. And so in my mind, just my opinion, it certainly makes sense to complete the networks and fill in the gaps where they currently exist instead of excluding them. So good recommendation. I'll definitely incorporate that feedback. Thank you.
Commissioner Robson.
I think the Commissioner Westerbeck had his card up. Was that correct?
Sorry, I lost track.
That's okay. That's correct. I'll try and be quick. I know we're limited to time. I just want to piggyback on what Commissioner Dodd said. Several of us have learned about a couple different consultants for the years that do those productive place studies. One of them is Urban 3, and I know Director Cotterman has been in contact with them. And I've also chatted with council members Thompson and Doerr about bringing them in for a free presentation. They actually did a presentation for Kenmore Planning Commission about 2 months ago. And it's a real eye-opener. It shows you where your money's coming from and where you're not making money. And most of Bothell, it probably takes more than it makes. And downtown Bothell would probably be the spiky part where most of the money comes from. So it's really fascinating. And we might want to consider talking with them, doing their free presentation here one night. It's a special presentation, and it's just perfectly timed for this kind of effort. So just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Commissioner Robson.
Hi, Claire Robson. I just wanted to mention, because we had talked about the AU of the college, that the North Creek also cuts through the North Creek Trail. Cuts through the college and connects the Beardsley development to the Bothell downtown area really nicely in there. And I just wanted to bring that up. To when we consider our boundaries and whether or not like the regional, we need to specify one part of the trail, or if we can include, or if we need to expand it to include North Creek. I know that at the intersection of North Creek and Sammamish, there's always, because I live there, and people are always like, do we go all the way out to Woodinville or do we go to Kenmore to find a place to stop? People don't even realize that at that North Creek, like it's just like a quarter of a mile. You can go and get ice cream, but that's not really clear. And so I'm not sure, again, we talked about how, we don't know where the AU units come from and how that's designated, or if we include the trail, can we include the North Creek Trail, how that would work? But it's something to consider as well for increased potential and driving traffic as connectivity, because North Creek is the northern access of the trails. So that could be a really big connection point.
Yeah, I'm having recollection of discussing this with Dave at some point, but it is a good point, and it kind of goes with Commissioner Curd's point earlier, and whether to include these amenities or not. And one of the criteria for the application is they want us to discuss, how this is going to help, establish new connections or enhance existing connections. So we'll definitely consider that feedback too. And Dave's camera's been off. I don't know if he's taking a break, but I'll let him weigh in if he has anything to include. So thanks.
Commissioner Alders, and then we'll need to think about whether to extend or wrap this after that.
Hey, I saw Dave come back. Let's hear from him first.
I would just say that, like I said earlier, that I think that the feedback we've gotten so far is that we'll be able to include some of these amenities as serving this area, even if they're not fully within the boundaries. So I think that's all good discussion about things that we do want to be able to fund, but might not require us including them within the boundaries.
All right, then Commissioner Alders.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And hopefully this is brief. This has been a really great conversation, and I really appreciate all of the commissioners and their thoughts, and that I see you taking copious notes over there. So thank you for that. My last question is, in looking at the distinction between the countywide plan and an urban growth plan, I'm seeing that your numbers are actually kind of close to the urban growth plan. And I see also that you're are you aiming for an urban growth at some point in the future when you go from like the 16 to the 27 to the 54? These are notes I took from the potential activity unit slide. And if yes, is there support from the community for that? And also, what would it take for Bothell to become an urban growth center? Some questions for you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, those are good points and a good question. So we hadn't really had that discussion, but that's a good point that we're starting to bump up along those minimum thresholds for the other types of centers. And so I think, to start with, we start where we're at, and then if we are chosen as a candidate to be able to compete for funding and go on to plan for this in our 2024 update, then we could certainly talk about putting mechanisms in place to be promoted to a larger growth center. And I don't know what that looks like in terms of the requirements by PSRC, at what point they get involved. I think I want to say off the top of my head, the regional growth center designations, those are, that's a PSRC thing, and you've got to report periodically as to why you still qualify as a regional growth center. And I just think it's too early in the game for the counties to have put something in place if that should happen. Or maybe they have had conversation about it. I don't know that they have, but that's a good point, and I'll be sure to circle back around with Director Cotterman and Dave about that in our analysis. So thank you.
Okay, so we've bumped up against the additional 10 minutes we've added. I think we're probably close to wrapping this one. Looking across, I see Commissioner Curd wanting to make another comment, so we'll have to extend. Commissioner Curd?
I move to extend the meeting by 5 minutes to close it out.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Alders, I think you were quicker on the draw.
I second the motion.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we extend the meeting 5 minutes to bring it to closure tonight. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All right, so 5 more minutes. So this was a study session. Senior Planner Lamb, thank you for bringing this to us. As I think you can readily tell, it's of great interest to the commission. I hope you got a lot of feedback to help you along. No action is required on this as it is a study session, but I do think we'll be hearing again from you on this matter, and we do look forward to being kept apprised as this moves through and as you move maybe from potential boundaries to proposed boundaries and then perhaps final boundaries. You keep us involved in that discussion so we can give you our thoughts on that. So with that, I'll move on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business staff wants to bring to us? I think not. Seeing none. Reports from staff. You all have anything to bring to us tonight?
Just want to mention that next month, this isn't final, but from what I can gather, you should anticipate that we'll be talking to you about the updated CPPs for both counties and preliminary growth targets next month, as well as possibly talking about our TDR kickoff for the TDR program in Canyon Park for, transfer of development rights for essential public facilities. So those are 2 items that we're planning to bring to you next month. So that's all I have.
And the TDR item was a subject of council discussion last night, I believe, correct?
Correct. I think it's on our official planning docket as well, too, as part of Canyon Park implementation. So
thank you. All right, reports from members. I know a number of members participated in a housing summit last Friday. I think we had a quorum, if I'm not mistaken. I'd say I found it interesting. It's always interesting to hear what others are doing so that we can see how our efforts compare to theirs. It's not a race or a contest, but you can learn from others. So I found it informative. I don't know if any other commissioners want to make a comment on that. Seeing none, perhaps Commissioner Westerbeck.
It was actually informative. It's encouraging to see. I knew a lot of the players, but it's encouraging to see how many cities and larger organizations, nonprofits and stuff are working really hard at getting people housed. So it's always kind of like wind in our sail to see that. So I agree with you. Some of it was review for me because I tend to, because of the industry I'm in, architecture, I attend to a lot of these anyway. But it was informative. It was good. And it was great to see so much representation.
Yes, as Commissioner Westerbrook noted, there were a number of cities involved and ranging from staff to elected officials, which is always a good thing to see, that cross-section of participation. Any other reports from members? Seeing none, perhaps due to the lateness of the hour and bumping up against our extension, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Dodd.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Second. Commissioner Curd.
I second the motion.
All in favor of adjourning? The June 16th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission is adjourned at 9:15 this evening. Thank you all. We ran a little long, as happens occasionally, but I think it was some good discussion. We'll see you all in July. Have a safe and happy 4th.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, all.
All right. Good night.